Here she is. Back home and 50 less quills in her face. Are you breathing? Yeah. Yep. Ran off after a rabbit and got a porcupine instead. You're lucky you're a cute dog. And there's my man. Get some Tums. I'll get back to the basement. Just be a minute. Should have started this before, but yeah, whatever. I'm going for the world's worst live stream ever. So far, I think I'm winning. Alright. Back to work. I wonder if there's another place I can put the camera. It's right there now. I'd like to have it over here so it faces this way, but I don't think there's really an option for that right now. But anyway, dog's alive for another day. Plug that back in. So I had to do a little bit before I started streaming, so I got these filled up. I have the pearls in them. I have the seashells, and I found some old shark teeth I had, so I threw those in there too. So I just some bad jellyfish. Oh, BB. I don't have time for your artwork. Let's listen to more people go missing.
Now your bones are healthy. Thanks.
I've been alone this whole time.
You're wrong. You will never, ever be alone. For the sake of the future, we must all come together.
Doesn't show me how many. There we go.
Tim's new Supreme Stack with sliced seasoned steak and double smoked bacon, built to satisfy.
Alright, here's my plan.
Games. I'm actually really excited. There's a brand new game called Expedition into Darkness that's like a medieval zombie extraction game. So we're going to be playing that. If you'd like to support us by giving us your money, we would very much appreciate that. You can do so by going to Patreon, or you can just, buy our merch for Bunker Branding. And if you would like to consume the Lodge and feel our essence pulse through you, you can do so by purchasing some Mount Pocono Perk from Tableau Roasting Company. Last but not least, thank you to Fume for sponsoring this video. I'm Aiden Mattis, and thanks for stopping by the Lord Lodge.
Good enough for me. Isn't this exciting?
If you're not planning on going missing, do not travel to New England. However, if you do plan on going missing, that is the place nobody will look for. I'm Aiden Mattis, and welcome back to the Lore. On November 3rd, 2003, two police officers arrived at a residence in Amherst, Massachusetts to conduct a sting operation. Earlier that evening, their department received a call from a young woman reporting that her Fleet Bank credit card appeared to have been stolen, after she discovered a series of charges dating from October 20th onward, which she was certain she had not made. The thief hadn't spent much, with 6 fraudulent purchases totaling just $79.02, but they had ordered quite a bit of pizza from several shops around town.
Oh no.
Officer Carlos Rivera was given the responsibility of investigating the situation, and as he followed up with the restaurants indicated by the report and confirmed by the bank records, he collected receipts from Pinocchio's, Domino's, and Papagino's, with only the last restaurant being one frequented by the card's actual owner. From those receipts, he learned that whoever had stolen the card had a thing for chicken Caesar and fajita wraps, cheese pizzas, garlic bread, and mozzarella sticks. So Rivera may have surmised that those purchases indicated a college student as the culprit, but the fact that they'd all been delivered to an address at Kennedy Hall on the UMass Amherst campus confirmed it. What Officer Rivera couldn't prove was precisely which resident of that dorm was placing the orders. Each receipt bore the same signature, but the police would need to catch the thief in the act in order to ensure that this hadn't been stolen as well. To that end, he instructed the managers of each of the relevant restaurants to call the police if someone attempted to pay using the card in question. As it happened, the very night of the report, someone did just that, and the Amherst PD sent out patrol officers Pinkham and Reardon to set up a sting. On the orders of the police, Pinocchio sent a driver out to Kennedy Hall with an empty box and called the buyer back with a 15-minute delivery estimate. The driver met the buyer outside of the building, took a signature, and then at that moment, the two officers emerged from their hiding places to confront the thief. She was a 22-year-old college student from Hanson, Massachusetts, and she didn't try to argue about what had just happened. Instead, she complied with their requests, identified herself, and allowed them to follow her up to her room, where she handed over a Fleet Visa debit card bearing her own name. But it didn't match the number on the receipt she'd signed just moments earlier. Something here was off. Officer Pinkham, according to his own report, informed her that now was the time to come clean about where she'd gotten the stolen card number. She thought for a moment, then replied that she had taken the numbers off of the Pinocchio's receipt that she had found on the ground. Pinkham turned to his partner and asked if the receipt in his hand included the full number of cards to make the purchase, only for Officer Reardon to reply that it did not. They only showed the last 4 digits. Pinkham then turned back to the young woman and asked her once again where she'd obtained the stolen number, only for her to say that maybe it was from a Domino's receipt rather than Pinocchio's. Asked how she remembered the full 16-digit number, she simply looked down at the ground in silence, but after further prompting, walked over to her desk and retrieved a note card with the correct number written on it, as well as several phone numbers and that of a dorm room in the same hall. Officer Pinkham made his way down to the relevant room and knocked on the door, which was opened by another female student. The patrolman then asked if she had any fraudulent charges on her card, and he was told that while the residents of that particular room didn't, her friend who lived in the same building did. Pinkham asked her to call that friend, who arrived soon after, and confirmed that she too had ordered food to the room number written on the note card, and that she had discarded the receipts in empty boxes in the trash room down the hall. A trash room located between that room and the one occupied by the now suspect. The officers then informed the owner of the stolen card that she could expect to hear from Officer Rivera soon and return to speak with their suspect. Upon questioning, she admitted to using the card 6 times, though she refused to explain why she had done so, and the officers left without performing an arrest. 6 days later, the Amherst PD called their suspect in for an interview with Officer Rivera. He showed her all of the evidence compiled against her, informed her of the status of the investigation, and the fact that she was the main suspect for a number of concrete reasons. Though she was not being detained at that moment, was not required to answer any questions, and would not be arrested at the conclusion of the interview. Upon acknowledging that she understood the circumstances, Officer Rivera proceeded to ask her if she had used the card in question, and she confirmed once again that she had, though she did dispute making any purchases from Papagino's. Officer Rivera thanked her for her time and honesty, informed her that she was going to be charged for an unauthorized use of a credit card, and would receive her court summons in the mail. And then she was offered the opportunity to make a written statement regarding why she had done this, which again, to that point, she still had not explained.
Pizza.
She once again declined the offer to explain herself, but did apologize for what she'd done, and even offered to make restitution for the stolen money. At which point, Officer Rivera advised her that he would notify the court of her cooperation. With that, she left the building, and Rivera turned to writing his report about this strange case, and its even stranger defendant. Her name was Maura Murray, and in just a few months, she'd become the subject of one of the most famous missing persons cases of the 21st century. Maura would go on to disappear on February 9, 2004, after driving her 1996 Saturn S Series off the shoulder of a rural New Hampshire highway. And in the 21 years since that night, a number of theories about what happened have gained popularity. Journalist and author James Renner believes that she may have deliberately gone missing in order to start a new life. Brianna Maitland case investigator Greg Overacker has suggested that both girls might have been victims of a serial killer. Others still argue that she was abducted, either by someone who lured her out to that lonely stretch of road, or simply as a victim of opportunity. All of these theories have their merits and their flaws, and in order to understand why they formed, we have to go back to the very last time Maura was seen alive, and what happened in the days leading up to that moment. Now, as with any missing persons case, there are quite a few factors that go into the story. But the first factor we're going to talk about is today's sponsor, Factor. Factor is a meal delivery service that we have been raving about for the last, 3 years now, basically. Yeah, and there's a reason for that. It's that we genuinely like Factor. I've got some sitting in my fridge at home that I actually can't stop thinking about. I'm not going to get to eat it tonight, so I'm waiting on tomorrow. Like, I remember when we first started working with them, I was legitimately excited for each new Factor meal because they are legitimately that tasty. The one I'm thinking about right now is a Thanksgiving home-style turkey and gravy that is just going to make my night tomorrow so much better. Now, don't get me wrong, I love a good home-cooked meal. I like cooking myself, and my girlfriend does an even better job of it than I do, but we are both busy working adults, and sometimes it's a little bit easier to just pop something in the microwave and go to town on that. Now, Aiden, you might be thinking, why go with microwave food instead of takeout? There's a number of reasons. All of them are good ones. One of them is that Factor has a lot of options, usually 35 or more menu options per week. And of course, you can add on to that. You can get breakfast options, there's snacks, there's smoothies, there's juices, and all of it is dietitian organized, dietitian approved. And of course, the meals themselves are chef crafted, which is the same kind of thing you get when you go with takeout. But takeout is, especially if you use like a delivery service, upwards of $50 for 2 people to eat. Meanwhile, Factor, if you're going with 2 meals, that's going to average out to 24. So you're spending half the money or less. It also gets there quicker because takeout takes half an hour to an hour to arrive. Meanwhile, Factor takes 2 minutes in the microwave. And then, of course, there's the calories. There's just the size
I'm
of
not
that
getting these out.
I love to go out
I
and
shoved
get
them in
a
and now
nice
I can't
big
pull them
feast
out.
of Mexican or Chinese,
So
something
I have to
like
get
that.
these out with the hammer.
But then I'm eating 3,000 calories that I really didn't need to consume. Meanwhile, a completely reasonable amount of calories per meal, and they're printed right there on the
So
box.
I'm going to take the hammer to these. I'll be right back.
With Factor, you actually know what you're eating. And I know if you go to the grocery store, you look at the microwave and meal section, they're usually pretty limited in selection. That's, again, 35 plus meals every week. And they're actually filling. It's not like those little TV dinners where, yeah, it's food, but Now, Factor does come in a similar tray, and you can't eat it out of that tray, but if you take it out and put it on a real plate, it actually looks like food, unlike some of the competitor options. I guess what I'm trying to say here is whether you've got a busy lifestyle, you're not very good at cooking yourself, you're trying to stay on a solid diet, or you're just working on a budget, Factor is a great way to get the kind of food you want in a nice, easy package without the expense, without the wait times, and without the excessive calories. So if you'd like to see for yourself why it is that we have been working with Factor for basically our entire lifetime as a sponsored YouTube channel, you can head to Factor75.com or click the link below and use code 50LoreLodge to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first Factor box. Again, that's code 50LoreLodge at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. On the night of February 5th and into the morning of February 6, 2004, Mara Murray was working at the campus security desk in Melville Hall on the UMass Amherst campus. Previously a cadet at West Point, Mara had made the change after deciding that the military lifestyle wasn't really for her. But the academic rigor and highly motivated spirit which earned her a place at the prestigious military academy hadn't left when she did. She managed to make the dean's list while also working and running on the school's track team, and most who knew her saw a bright future ahead on this particular night.
2 out of 3 survived the hammer.
Didn't seem right. It was around 1:20 a.m. when her shift supervisor, Karen Nayat, realized that...
Hello. Sorry, I was in the other room breaking things. I didn't know you messaged. Hello, how are you? I'm making some jellyfish in jars. They will kind of look like this when they're all done. Well, the sand will be at the bottom. I'm just trying to get the bubbles off these guys right now. And these ones, I've got shark's teeth and seashells and little glass balls and some black sand in them. I don't have any sand dollars, unfortunately. There we go. Alright, and I'm listening to Murder Mysteries.
Mara seemed to be struggling emotionally. For reasons that were unclear at the time, Mara had started crying, but when Karen tried to comfort her, she refused to explain what caused her distress. And for reasons that are unclear at this current time, Wikipedia suggests that Mara cryptically choked out the words "my sister" to Nayat when asked what was wrong, despite the fact that none of the 3 sources cited for that statement contain this information. What the sources do tell us is that Mara had been speaking to her older sister Kathleen earlier during her shift, though at the time, nobody knew what that call was about. Recognizing that whatever it was probably more important than staying at her desk, Karen comforted Mara before escorting her back to her room in Kennedy Hall. Whatever was bothering Mara, the Whitman-Hanson Express reported in 2007, she did not share it with her friends or her father, who visited her at UMass the next day on Saturday, February 7th. And I do want to give a huge shout out here to Maribeth Conway of the Whitman-Hanson Express for an absolutely phenomenal article, series of articles really, that she wrote on this case and which helped me to form the framework of this series. Now, Fred Murray had always doted on his youngest daughter, coaching her youth sports teams, attending high school track meets, taking her on camping trips in the mountains of New Hampshire, and on that weekend, he was looking to set her up with a more reliable vehicle. Her 1996 Saturn was on its last legs, with just 3 of its engine's 4 cylinders operational, and Fred wasn't comfortable with her driving it any longer. After a long day of scouting out local dealers, they settled on a 3-year-old Geo Prism, which is a car I had never heard of before this exact moment of writing the script. And with that objective squared away, they headed off for dinner with Mara's friend Kate Markopoulos. The father and daughter pair had a tradition of trying out a new brew pub every time Dad visited, and this time they ended up at the Amherst Brewing Company on North Pleasant Street. After dinner, Mara had plans to attend a small dorm party on campus, and for unknown reasons, Fred offered to let Mara drive his new Toyota Corolla for the night, despite the fact that she wasn't really planning to go anywhere. Regardless, Mara took him up on the offer and drove him back to the Quality Inn on Russell Street in nearby Hadley before returning to campus around 10:30 p.m. She spent the next 4 hours with Kate and a few other friends, drinking Sky Blue malt and wine until about 2:30 in the morning.
Makes sense to me.
At that point, Mara made a decision that her friends would later say struck them as odd. She wanted to return her father's car. They tried to talk her out of this, and ultimately she told them that she planned to just walk home to Kennedy Hall, but instead she went to get the car and began making her way to Hadley. She was on her way there when, around 3:30 a.m., she crashed into either a post or a guardrail, causing $8,000 to $10,000 worth of damage to the Corolla. Surprisingly, despite Mara's intoxicated state, no field sobriety or breathalyzer tests were conducted, and no charges were filed as a result of the crash. Police then gave Mara a ride to her father's hotel, where the shaken-up and extremely apologetic 21-year-old informed her dad of what had happened. Fred, to his credit, handled the situation with care, later telling the Whitman-Hanson Express that if this is the only trouble a kid ever causes, then you're pretty lucky as a parent. Then, shortly after arriving back at Quality Inn, Mara borrowed Fred's cell phone and called her boyfriend, U.S. Army Captain Billy Roche, who at the time was a lieutenant stationed at Fort Sill in Oklahoma. By all accounts, their conversation went as it should have, with Billy consoling the young woman that he and everyone else expected he would one day marry. Fred and Mara spent the rest of that morning, Sunday, February 8th, on the phone with his insurance company. They confirmed that they would cover the damages, and that seems to have settled the matter as far as Fred was concerned. Mara agreed to fill out the proper accident report form.
I don't know if you can see what I'm doing.
And Fred rented a car in order to attend a business obligation in Bridgeport, Connecticut. He made sure to call his daughter later that evening, around 11:30 p.m., to remind her to pick up the forms in the morning, and she said that she'd give him a call around 8 p.m. the next day to go over the paperwork with him. As far as anyone could tell, the situation was handled, and everything should have been resolved without issue. But for some reason, Mara proceeded to make a series of strange and, to this day, unexplained decisions. Late that night, shortly after her conversation with her father, Mara jumped on a MapQuest to search for routes to Burlington, Vermont, and the Berkshires of western Massachusetts. And after this, she seems to have gone to bed. Hours later, shortly before 1 o'clock p.m., she called Dominic and Linda Salamoni, owners of a condo in Bartlett, New Hampshire, where she and her family had stayed on prior occasions. Now, the precise details of that conversation are unknown, but Mara did not end up renting from them. What we do know is that that call lasted approximately 3 minutes, and then at 1 o'clock p.m. on the dot, she emailed Billy. Her message to him read, "I love you more, stud. I got your messages, but honestly, I didn't feel like talking to much of anyone. I promised to call today, though. Love you, Mara," which would suggest that he had tried to check in on her at some point after their call on Sunday morning. Whatever the case, the next call Mara made was to a fellow nursing student, and once again, the details of that conversation are unclear.
What?
Not long after finishing that call, Mara sent an email to her professors and her supervisor at
There we
work,
go.
informing them that there had been a death in her family and that she would be taking a week off to deal with the situation. But this was a lie, as nobody on either side of Mara's family had passed away. Mara's next known action came at 2:05 p.m. when she contacted 1-800-GO-STOW, a line which connected travelers with hotels in the area of Stowe, Vermont. Once again, she made no reservations,
Strange.
and as would be expected, nobody
You're
thought
floating.
to report the
I don't want you
specifics
floating.
of her
Come here.
requests. She finally called Billy at 2:18 p.m., but he didn't pick up, and so she left a message promising to talk to him later. A little over an hour after that, at 3:30, Mara got into her barely drivable Saturn and drove to a nearby ATM, where a security camera reported her as she took out
I got time for this.
$200 in cash, which was most of the money in her account. She then stopped at a liquor store and spent $40 of that money on alcohol, including bottles of Bailey's Irish Cream, Lower Coffee Liqueur, vodka, and a box of wine, and then she left Amherst. Several hours later, at 7:27 p.m. on February 9, 2004, the Grafton County Sheriff's Department received a call from the Westman residence at 70 Wild Ammonoosuc Road, outside of Haverhill, New Hampshire. On the other end of the line was Faith Westman, reporting that there had been some kind of accident outside of her rural home. After hearing a loud thump around 7 p.m., she looked out her window to see a black sedan stuck in a ditch a short distance away, facing westbound off the eastbound side of the road. When dispatcher Rhonda Marcia pressed for more information, Faith told her that she couldn't think if anyone was hurt, but she could see a man in the vehicle. The operator then contacted the Haverhill Police Department, who sent Sergeant Cecil Smith out to the scene. Before he could arrive,
What's this
however,
on you?
the Grafton County Sheriff's Department received a second call about the same vehicle. That call came in from school bus driver Butch Atwood, who lived just a little ways further down the road at 4 Wild Ammonoosuc, and he too reported seeing the black sedan. In fact, he'd done more than just see it. He'd actually stopped and had spoken to the young woman standing nearby. She had long dark hair, worn down, and appeared to be shaken up but not injured. He'd offered to call police for her, but she declined and told him that she'd already called AAA for roadside assistance. Atwood, who was still concerned for her well-being given the cold weather, asked if she would like to wait inside at his house, but once again, the young woman declined the offer and chose to stay with her car.
Shit.
So, having exhausted his options, the bus driver drove the last 100 yards or so back to his house, but at that point it occurred to him that it was very unlikely anyone could contact AAA, given the sparse cell coverage in the area. Hence why he then called the police for assistance. Now, it wasn't that Butch Atwood thought the girl was up to anything nefarious, but rather that his tall, heavy-set frame at 350 pounds might have intimidated her, and she might be willing to trust a uniformed officer more than she would trust a complete stranger. But when Sergeant Smith arrived at the scene just a few minutes after Atwood called in his report, the girl was nowhere to be seen. Mara Murray had vanished into thin air. Fred Murray learned of his daughter's disappearance approximately 22 hours after she was last seen by Butch Atwood. He was still in Bridgeport when Kathleen, Mara's elder sister, called the news. Fred immediately called the Haverhill Police Department and pleaded with them to immediately begin searching for his youngest daughter, only to be told that the New Hampshire Fish and Game Service could begin a search the following day if Mara still hadn't turned up by then, despite the fact that temperatures were well below freezing at night. Completing the absolute bare minimum of their responsibilities, the department agreed to immediately list Mara as a missing person at 5:17 p.m. on Tuesday, February 10, 2004. To be fair, they hadn't completely wasted their time since finding her car abandoned on the side of the road. When Sergeant Smith arrived on the scene the night prior, he'd done a cursory search of the area. He later reported that evidence at the scene indicated the vehicle had been eastbound and had gone off the roadway, struck some trees, spun around, and come to rest facing the wrong way in the eastbound lane. Strangely, a rag from the car's emergency kit was stuffed into the vehicle's tailpipe, and while that could have caused the vehicle to stall if it were jammed tight enough, it would not have caused the car to careen off the road and strike a tree as it had. Inside the sedan, he found a box of Franzia wine behind the driver's seat of the vehicle and a red liquid on the driver's side door and ceiling of the car, as well as a Coke bottle that contained a red liquid with a strong alcoholic odor. The box of wine had been damaged, potentially in the crash, but the more interesting part was the fact that none of the other bottles of alcohol that Mara had bought in Amherst were found in the car. Adding to the intrigue, the Whitman-Hanson Express reported that other items found in Mara's car were a AAA card, insurance forms, gloves, compact discs, makeup, computer-generated directions for Burlington and Stowe, Vermont, and a book Mara had been reading by Nicholas Howe, Not Without Perry, as well as clothes, toiletries, textbooks, and even birth control pills. And according to Brianna Maitland PI Greg Overacker, who got his information on this from Mara's other older sister, Julie, Mara had also packed running shoes, workout clothes, the blank accident report forms, and even several pieces of diamond jewelry. As Sergeant Smith conducted his search, EMS and the local fire department arrived on scene. Paramedics didn't stay long, as they had nobody to treat and were needed elsewhere, but the firemen stuck around to secure the site and look for any sign of Mara. Meanwhile, Smith drove down to Atwood's house, where he found the man sitting inside of his bus. Smith reportedly tapped on the window and asked where the girl was, only for Atwood to say that he hadn't seen anything since leaving the abandoned sedan. So the two men decided it would be best to just drive the area in search of the missing woman. Smith reportedly headed west along Wild Ammonoosuc, also known as Route 112, while Atwood would later tell the Caledonian Record that he took a ride around the back roads for about 15 minutes, and then drove to French Pond. The Express clarified that Atwood's route took him in a loop from Mountain Lakes, a nearby recreational and residential area, to the Swiftwater Stage Shop General Store, but it's unclear if anyone drove eastbound on Wild Ammonoosuc. Whatever the case, neither man saw any sign of Mara, and at 9:27 p.m., Sergeant Smith received a call dispatching him to a more immediate, yet unrelated problem on Limekiln Road in North Haverhill. The fire department was already gone by that point, and the Saturn had been towed to Lavoie's Auto Care Center on Route 10 in Haverhill. With that, the first night of the investigation, unofficial as it was at the time, came to an end, though there are some discrepancies regarding what exactly happened that night.
Spoken.
According to the Whitman-Hanson Express, Faith Westman and Butch Atwood were not the only people to see Mara that night. According to the Express's 2007 series of articles entitled Mara is Missing, the Murat family were also home at the time, and they told the Express, from our kitchen window, we saw a car down the road with trouble lights flashing and someone walking around the car. John Murat believed that he'd seen the car back up parallel to the road at one point, though the Caledonian Record reported on Friday, February 20th, 2004, that after the crash, the car's radiator was pushed back into the fan, making the vehicle inoperable. Though it should be said that, given the design of that model of car, it is possible that that specific kind of damage would not have prevented it from moving short distances for a short while afterwards. And because I'm not really a car person, I'm gonna let Thornbury explain it to you.
From what I could find online of the car, the engine in that model was not how you would normally expect an engine to be sat in an engine bay. Normally you think of an engine kind of being front to back, but in smaller cars with smaller engines, sometimes they'll be actually sideways in the engine bay. So in a lot of older cars, you would have the fan for the radiator be directly connected on the front to back engine as a form of flywheel.
The water.
On these sideways facing engine cars,
Make
that's
it
not
set.
possible. They have their own flywheel, they have their own mechanism for keeping time. And the radiator fan is a totally separate mechanism. In this car, it was an electric radiator driven by a motor. And so at that point, if the radiator and the fan were completely damaged and completely inoperable, basically totaled, that doesn't necessarily mean that the engine itself is totaled, and that doesn't mean that the car would be inoperable. It's very likely, especially under these conditions, that the car would still have been able to be moved under its own power. It's just that for long distances, it would not have been able to appropriately cool itself, potentially overheated, and then cause irreparable damage. Now that's assuming that the engine was still in good condition, and that the reporting on the radiator and the radiator fan was incomplete. So it may be the case that the entire front of the car was totaled, but based on the images that we see from the car, that's unlikely. So it is possible that it was capable of being moved around still.
He spoke well, and thus he shall live another day. Anyway, there was also the claim from Kate Westman that she'd seen a man smoking a cigarette in the car, which Mara's friends and family thought was odd for a number of reasons. First of all, Mara was a woman, and second of all, she despised smoking. There was the possibility that someone else was in the car with her, but Faith's husband Tim argued his wife was simply mistaken. To him, it appeared there was a young woman using a cell phone, and that the red light Faith believed was a cigarette was in reality a light from the device. Perhaps most intriguing of the observations, the Express reported that after Atwood drove away, Faith Westman noticed the Saturn's interior lights switch on and off, and witnessed a flurry of activity at the rear of the car, including a person standing in the trunk. An item of information which came from private investigator John Smith, who spoke with the Westmans after the incident. Now, Butch Atwood got the closest look at any of the witnesses, and his story was reported in a couple of different ways. Atwood himself said that when he arrived, Mara struggled to get out of her Saturn because the door was hitting against a snowbank. Regarding Mara's physical appearance, he told the Caledonian Record that he saw no blood and that she was cold and shivering. The disparity in storytelling, though minor, came with the conversation that the two had. Atwood told the press that he'd stepped out of the bus to ask Mara if she wanted him to call the police, and that she'd told him not to bother because she'd already called AAA. It would later be confirmed that his hunch about her not being able to do that was correct, and that Mara had in fact not called AAA. But the important part is how this differs from the description given by New Hampshire State Police Lieutenant John Scarinza later that year. According to a synopsis of the case which he authored, when Atwood stated that he was going to call local law enforcement to come assist, Mara pleaded with him not to call police, a statement which carries quite a bit of subtext. You see, from the night of the crash, police seem to have been skeptical of Mara's sobriety. Sergeant Smith mentioned the box of wine and the Coke bottle with an alcoholic smell.
You better than to do that.
Scarinza's words could be interpreted as an implication that Mara was deliberately avoiding contact with the police. And this may have colored their decision not to pursue a search on the 10th and to delay any further efforts until the 11th when Fred asked him to launch a search immediately. Atwood, for his part, told reporters that Mara had not appeared intoxicated when he spoke to her. And in one more fit of initial incompetence, the Haverhill Police Department issued a bolo for Mara Murray, in which they inaccurately described her as being 5 foot 3 inches tall, with black hair that reached down just below her shoulders. In reality, Mara was 5'7", with brown hair that reached only to her shoulders, and which she typically wore in a bun. It would not be the last time that a decision made by that department caused difficulties in the case.
Shit.
Fred Murray would battle the system repeatedly in the coming months. Mara's father, for his part, got involved in the case as soon as he could, arriving in Haverhill early the morning of the 11th to take part in the search. It was just
God damn it.
when he pulled into the modest parking lot of the Haverhill
Release me.
Department, which ran out of the small town's sole administrative building along Dartmouth College Highway. With a population of just 4,500 people, Haverhill fields a small law enforcement force of just 4 patrol officers and 1 detective, so they weren't exactly equipped to run a large-scale missing persons search. If Mara was going to be found, it would require more than just the efforts of those few uniforms and Fred Murray. Thankfully, the call was answered, not just by Mara's loved ones, but also by the New Hampshire State Police, Fish and Game, and a canine unit. And it began to look like there was a chance of finding her before it was too late. As the search effort kicked into gear on that cold Wednesday morning, law enforcement split duties with the volunteers. The dog team was deployed directly to the crash site to see if their animals could pick up a scent trail, while Fred Murray scanned the ground around the scene for any sign of footprints. Overhead, a Fish and Game helicopter did the same from the air, hoping that the lack of snow since Monday night would have preserved whatever path she might have taken through the 2.5-foot deep drifts. Meanwhile, those of Mara's siblings who were within driving distance, those being Kathleen, her older brother Freddie, and her younger brother Curtis, were already surveying the various tourist towns nestled throughout the area, many of which had served as vacation homes for their family over the years. They stopped into motels and restaurants in towns like North Woodstock and Lincoln,
Release.
and traveled as far east as Bartlett and Conway. But nobody had seen hide nor hair of the missing nursing student, and there wasn't much success on the law enforcement side either. Both the helicopter and the ground team failed to find any human tracks in the
God
vicinity
damn
of the
it.
crash. The dog team
Everything's
tracked
getting
the scent
sticky
with
now.
Laura's gloves, but as so often happens, the dog lost it some 100 yards down the road, east of the crash site. According to the Express, the abrupt loss of Mara's scent in the middle of the road prompted officials to speculate that Mara got into a passing vehicle, though whether she did so voluntarily or was forced remains open to question. With the sunlight dwindling and little progress made, the search teams reported back to the Haverhill Police Department around 5 p.m. to regroup. It was around this time that Billy Roche and his parents arrived. The Army lieutenant had requested leave from Fort Sill when he learned of Mara's disappearance, and police were quick to put him into an interrogation room. They questioned him for a while in private, and then again with parents Sharon and Bill, before allowing all three of them to join the effort. As it turned out, Billy hadn't just brought himself. He'd also brought a potential lead in the form of a voicemail left while he was traveling from Oklahoma. According to Sharon Roche, the message was very short and consisted of a shivering, soft whimpering sound with labored breathing as if someone was very cold. Immediately upon learning of that call, everyone had the same question. Could it have been Mara? Answering that question, however, was going to be more difficult than they might have hoped. First of all, the call had not come from Mara's cell phone, or any cell phone for that matter. Instead, it traced to a prepaid AT&T calling card, potentially one of two that Sharon had purchased for Mara the previous Thanksgiving. Now, for those too young to remember, which honestly includes me, the way these cards would work is that you would go to a
Just
public
like that.
phone and you would dial a number that would connect you to, I guess, the operator. You then type in a PIN and then type in the number you wish to call, and that was how it charged your card. The problem was that identifying what kind of calling card it had come from was where the ability to trace the call ended, at least according to the family. New Hampshire State Police would eventually conclude that the call traced to the American Red Cross, but Sharon Roche has roundly disputed that claim. Speaking directly to the Express in 2007, she told a reporter that she could say with certainty that, contrary to New Hampshire State Police info, the call could not be traced, because they lacked the PIN and card number associated with that card. It just doesn't make any sense that the call was from the Red Cross, she continued, because if they had been trying to call Billy, they never called back. Furthermore, she noted that the soft crying, sniffling, and muffled sobs couldn't logically be connected with the Red Cross either. But state police, that didn't matter. As far as they were concerned, the call came from the Red Cross, and that meant it wasn't relevant to the disappearance. As far as the events of the 11th went, however, the search had made little progress. The only lead they had was the abrupt drop-off of the scent trail along the road, and so they focused their efforts on the possibility that she may have gotten into a car with someone. Still, that didn't explain why she'd come to New Hampshire in the first place, and that was a rather important factor in the case. By the end of the search day, the Haverhill police speculated that Mara planned to end her own life or had planned to run away, citing their belief that there was no evidence of foul play or that Mara had wandered into the woods. Already working to bring an end to the search, Haverhill Police Chief Jeff Williams asserted that, at the age of 21, Mara was within her legal rights to not want to be found. Mara's loved ones, on the other hand, vehemently disagreed. Sharon Roche later told reporters, "I cannot believe that there would be any problem in her life that would cause her to run away from three close groups of people in her life. Her family, Billy..."
The cheese made with 100% Canadian dairy looks like the Blue Cow logo on Black Diamond, Cracker Barrel, and cheese strings.
Make Aveda's new Botanical Repair Purple Toning Shampoo part of your wash routine for a stronger, 5 times brighter blonde.
IXL is helping 15 million students succeed in math and language arts. On IXL, your child can stay on track or get ahead by practicing with fun, interactive questions. Whether they learn best with step-by-step explanations, video tutorials, or games, IXL is here to guide them. Backed by over 75 scientific research studies, you can trust that you're choosing the best educational technology. Hand your child the keys to success. Join IXL
very close-knit group of handsome high school girlfriends. Fred Murray held the same opinion, unable to recall any pattern of behavior or traumatic events which might have led his daughter to do such a thing. The only thing that came to mind was the car crash a few nights prior, but Mara had essentially walked away from that without any consequences. And I didn't put it in the script, but it also occurs to me now that the things she brought with her do not suggest she had any plans of harming herself. You don't bring diamond earrings and birth control pills and your textbooks if you plan on leaving this world behind. And as everybody in her life agreed, there didn't seem to be a reason for her to leave her life behind either. Anyway, with that,
You
first
little
day of search
fuck
came
nugget.
to a close,
That's
and
my
the
fault.
Murray camp retreated to the Wells River Motel in Vermont, just across
And
the
that's my
Potomac
fault.
River from Woodsville, New Hampshire.
Fucking whore.
Modest, cozy refuge, as described by the Woodland Hanson Express, would become their home for the foreseeable future, and the next morning they headed back out to Haverhill for day 2 of the search. Thursday the 12th saw the beginning of media involvement in the case, as police issued a press release stating that Mara may be en route to the Kankamegas Highway area and was listed as endangered and possibly a danger to herself. Additionally, the release stated that witnesses at the scene reported seeing a lone female with no apparent injuries who appeared impaired due to alcohol consumption. And this claim appeared in spite of the fact that the only witness to speak with Mara, that being Butch Atwood, had described her as not appearing intoxicated or otherwise impaired. Yet another
You're
link
not.
in a chain
You're
of
not.
multiple actions
You're
made by the
definitely
Haverhill
not.
Police Department during the most crucial phase of the investigation and search effort. As the family wrestled with law enforcement in New Hampshire, another search was underway back in Amherst. UMass and Amherst police, who just months earlier had searched Mara's room for that stolen credit card number, were now combing through her dorm for any evidence that might explain why she left, where she'd been trying to go, and what she intended to do when she got there. It was during this time that certain details first came to light, such as Mara's lie about a death in the family, her ATM withdrawal, and her liquor store purchase, as well as her breakdown at work a week prior, and some details suggesting that she might have either packed up her room or had not yet unpacked after getting back from winter break. Kathleen Murray would tell police that she and Mara had spoken on the phone on that evening of February the 5th around 10:30 p.m., but that their conversation was regular, just trying to get through the day kind of stuff, and that when she heard Mara had been crying later that night, she couldn't understand what about their conversation might have caused that kind of a response. Back in New Hampshire,
I put these in too soon, and now I'm paying the price. I didn't wait till they set.
According to the Express, Fred used this opportunity to speak directly to his daughter, just in case she had run away on purpose and might be listening to the news. I don't know what the matter is, or the trouble you think you might be in, but it isn't anything we can't solve, he said through the media. It's me. You can tell me. We'll work it out until we solve it. Then, Billy informed the press of something that really leaves me stunned as a historian of persons cases. Police were already suspending the search. There had been no evidence that Mara had disappeared from that crash site intentionally. She had left no notes, had packed books, clothes, and even jewelry. And even if she planned to run away from Amherst, that didn't mean she'd chosen to leave the crash site on foot, or that she wasn't in danger as a result.
Yep,
Furthermore,
and I fucked up.
neither her credit and debit cards nor her cell phone had been used since Monday, meaning
My
that
fault.
for all anyone knew, she could still be lost outdoors. And that degree of incompetence was about to get so very much worse. Mara's family wasn't willing to throw in the towel just because the Haverhill police were. And on Friday, they began calling and visiting with police stations across the river in Vermont. Mara had printed out directions to 2 of that state's towns, Burlington and Stowe, so it only seemed reasonable that she might have tried to continue on to one of those places after crashing her car. When Fred contacted Vermont police, however, he learned that they didn't know anything about Mara. Not only had the Haverhill police failed to extend their bolo to departments just across the river, in the very state where her MapQuest directions suggested she was going, but they had also neglected to inform any of the departments to their east along
Where is it?
Route 112.
This one.
And as soon as Fred Murray
This
learned
is my
of these
fault.
failures, whatever faith remained in the Haverhill officers was shattered, and his efforts became far more direct. In the week following the suspension of the official search, the Murrays and their friends hit the ground harder than anyone had in the first few days. They knocked on doors, made telephone calls, and spoke with residents, the Express reported, including those who had called 911. Fred and Billy went on CNN to speak with Soledad O'Brien, describing her actions that Monday as completely out of character, and noting that she follows through on what she says she's going to do. referring to her stated plans to call both her father and her boyfriend on that fateful evening. With permission from property owners, Fred himself trudged through snow, brush, and debris, leaving no stone unturned as he battled the
There we
elements in
go.
search of any sign of his missing daughter. And in the course of doing so, he uncovered yet another shocking oversight by the Haverhill police. Aside from the witnesses they'd spoken to on the night of Mara's accident, they hadn't interviewed a soul who lived on Wild Amanuset Road. Fred read them the riot act on the 18th, and as a result, the state police, along with Fish and Game, hit the ground once more to perform a second search the next day. This time they brought 3 dogs, while the helicopter team conducted a more wide-ranging scan of a 2-mile radius around the crash site. They checked trails and roadways all over the area, but their efforts still turned up nothing. The good news, at least in a way, was that the state police were taking it a little bit more seriously than the locals had. While he didn't list Mara's case as a criminal investigation, Sergeant Tom York told reporters that the term was just a label and that police would be treating the case much as they could a criminal investigation. What he meant was that they were actively collecting background information, looking into leads, and trying to piece together what could have happened that night if Mara hadn't intended to. Oh my God. Sadly, they found nothing. And once again, authorities made the decision to suspend their efforts, albeit with considerably more reason to do so than the first time around. There was a brief glimmer of hope on the 26th, when Kathleen Murray found a pair of women's underwear in the snow near French Pond, but the DNA testing needed to determine if they belonged to Mara would take 2 weeks to come back. The Murrays were exhausted, their friends needed to get back to work, and there was nothing else they could do except to wait. So,
Fine.
March
Let
2nd,
go.
they checked out of the Wells River Motel and headed back to Massachusetts. 17 days later, Brianna Maitland's car was found crashed into the side of a barn off of a rural Vermont highway, and questions about a potential serial killer began to mount. As for that part of the story, a number of further just bizarre decisions by law enforcement and the theories about what might have happened to Mara as well as Brianna, that's what we're going to be covering next week. I hadn't initially planned for this to be a 2-part series, but as I got deeper and deeper into research and into writing this script, I came to the conclusion that the best way to give the most detail and the best version of this story was to break it up so that I could do justice to this narrative. I've already started writing that, and I'm already about 4 pages in, so I would not expect this to take more than 2 episodes. I don't foresee this becoming a JonBenet Ramsey situation, but it really seemed like the best way to go about this was a 2-part series. I do apologize for having to break it up. That is never my goal with these kinds of videos, but we are grateful for your support nonetheless.
Making me paranoid.
If you want to support us more directly, you can do so by going to Patreon.
Take these out and let them dry fully.
There's exclusive content over there. We are working on adding ad-free episodes, so those would have none of the YouTube ads. They would not have the sponsored ad read. It would just be the
I don't
straight
trust
video,
them anymore.
and that would go up it would probably go up the same time and same day, just as our work schedule. But point is,
I don't trust them. I put them in too quick. The super glue didn't.
If you'd like to support us in other ways, you can do that by going to tableauroastingco.com and purchasing Mount Pocono Perk, our signature coffee blend that I, a former barista at an artisan coffee shop that did all of our in-house roasting. I did not do the roasting, but I knew how the roasting worked, and I had to know every single detail about the flavor profiles. Anyway, I designed that coffee. You can also get our merch from bunkerbranding.com under the Lore Lodge section. We have several t-shirts and hoodie designs, and we're working on a hat. Now, if you're looking for more Lodge, you can do that by heading over to the Weird Bible, checking out History Unhinged, or seeing my personal channel where we mostly stream video games, but I'm hoping to get back into reaction content sometime this summer. And when I say reaction, I more mean commentary on paranormal videos. And specifically, I mean like allegedly real paranormal. If you want to know when stuff is coming out, engage further with the community, and play video games with us, stuff like that, you can go check out our Discord at bit.ly/jointhelodge, or you can click the link in the description, which will take you right there. We also have our live show, which airs
There's nothing in
Monday
this.
nights at 7 p.m. Eastern.
Not even seashells. Did I fuck up?
And if you're not able to catch that
I
live,
must have.
it's here on YouTube as a video on demand, or you can catch it on
What
any
did I do?
podcast platform on the Wednesday after it airs.
Alright, everybody
Last but
sit
not
out for
least, I would like to thank
15, 20
Backroom
minutes.
again for sponsoring this video
1, 2,
and
3,
so
4.
many of our other
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I'm short a jellyfish. What am I going to do with you? I can make a little fidget jar, I guess. Add a little bit more glue to make it slower. Add some sparkles. Add some seashells. Peculiar. I gotta sit here and wait for these to dry before I can finish them. Great. I do have an idea. Your bubbles are not unbubbling fast enough for me, so I have an idea. If I take you out, I dip you in a lesser bubble and give you a little jiggle jiggle. What a little wiggle. The bubbles are coming off, so that's good. Maybe I will leave you in there, actually. There we go. I could add some shark teeth to these guys, too.
If I had a nickel for every time the New England State Police Agency completely botched the investigation into the disappearance of a young woman between the months of February and March 2004, I'd have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but given how very specific that is, it truly is bizarre that it happened twice. I'm Aiden Mattis. Welcome to the video.
Bizarre or planned. I made necklaces out of these, but they were, like I said, shark teeth, so they're sharp.
March of 2004 was a difficult month. He spent every weekend in the Haverhill area, desperately searching for any leads which might breathe life into his daughter's case. And if that statement right there was confusing to you, it's because this is actually part 2 of our series on Maura Murray. Should I have written an introduction that made that clear? Probably, but I neglected to do so. So, if you don't know what I'm talking about, and you want to not be confused throughout this episode, which
See how much thicker that is?
I would recommend going to the description, clicking the link to part 1, and watching that first, because while this video will make sense without doing that, there are some references I'm going to make that will be more clear if you watch part 1 first. Now, with that said, we are at the end of the month of March, which is really the first month and a half of this investigation. And as that month went to a close, the eerily similar details of Brianna Maitland's disappearance just over 60 miles away in Vermont were beginning to make their way into the media. Like
Your bubbles.
Brianna was a young and attractive brunette who disappeared
I'm almost
from a rural
all
highway
gone, so
after
that's
crashing
good.
her car on the wrong side of the road. Both girls had vanished without leaving any scent trail or footprints.
Your bubbles are fine.
Passed by the car without reporting anything to law enforcement. Neither Brianna nor
Your bubbles are fine.
police arrived on scene, and authorities
And your
towed
bubbles
the
are
car
fine.
before
There we
further
go.
investigation of the area could be completed. But early in April, both the Vermont and New Hampshire State Police came together
Just
to
sitting
issue a
here
release
waiting.
stating that there was no connection between the 2 cases. Also early in
And
April,
you're fine.
2nd,
So you're fine.
Fred Murray received a notice from the Haverhill Police Department. According to the Caledonian Record, Chief of Police Jeff Williams sent the determined father a letter informing him that his department had received a written request from area residents about repeated trespassing and parking problems on their properties, and explaining that while they are sympathetic with the cause to find Maura, the right to quiet enjoyment of their personal property has been repeatedly and blatantly disregarded to the point that they now must insist that absolutely no one has permission to trespass on their properties. According to Williams, this was an order that Murray family members, friends, and relatives of Maura Murray, volunteer searches and canine handlers, private investigators, members of the press, and anyone else seeking clues or searching for Maura Murray were to stay off of private property or face arrest by his department. This letter came as a shock to the entire Murray camp. They had been asking for permission during all of their searches, and nobody had said a word to them in the month and a half since they'd begun their efforts. Sharon Rosh, the mother of Maura's boyfriend Billy, found the decision to send a letter rather than make a phone call offensive and callous, while Fred himself believed that the police had ulterior motives. So far, they hadn't looked great, and it was his opinion that the true intent of Williams' letter was that the police were trying to discourage any independent searches for Maura, and that it was an attempt to reduce the amount of publicity Maura's disappearance had been receiving. That opinion was bolstered shortly after the story made its way to the press on April 14th, because a week later on the 20th, another article came out regarding the issue of trespassing. In an article entitled "Residents Dispute Claims They Want Trespassers Arrested," the Caledonian Record reported that people living in the area where a 21-year-old University of Massachusetts Amherst student went missing dispute police claims they filed complaints regarding the woman's father, relatives, and searchers. When asked by the Record, Chief Williams refused to say how many complaints were actually filed or who had filed them, while Steve Loud of nearby McGuire Lane argued it's just the people down by the barn. People down by the barn were the Westmans, who had admitted to the Record that they had indeed filed a complaint and that the Murrays had never consulted them about checking their property. After 2 months, what are they looking for? Faith Westman asked. Have we not covered enough? As far as the Murrays and most of the Westman's neighbors were concerned, the answer was no. Steve Loud told the paper that claims the neighbors living near the accident site had gathered together to file complaints with the Haverhill Police Department were true, and that anyone looking for Maura was welcome to search the property. John Boutillier echoed that sentiment, telling the paper that he didn't care if people came on his land, and recognized that this was a stressful situation for Fred Murray. It makes you wonder if someone had been hiding, he added. Whether or not that was the case, the family felt that the local police and the New Hampshire State Police were either unwilling or unequipped to handle Maura's case. And at this point, they needed the assistance of the FBI if anything was to come of the search. As it turned out, the FBI had already offered to join the hunt back in mid-February, only to be told that their offer was appreciated, but not necessary. The Murrays strongly disagreed, so on April 29th, Fred held a press
Are you all dry yet?
American Legion Hall in concert with Bruce and Kelly Maitland. Also
What the hell happened here?
Amy Riley, a 20-year-old woman whose body was found in a swamp earlier that month. Amy went missing in August of 2003 after leaving a bar in Manchester, New Hampshire, and despite the arguments from police that there was no connection between the three cases, all three families felt that the similarities between the disappearances and the fact that they crossed state lines warranted FBI assistance. As April turned into May, and May neared June, Fred Murray turned to the only
Let's see how
authority with a
these-
chance to turn things around, the governor of New Hampshire. With the FBI unable to step in until they were either invited or until an official connection was made between the Vermont and New Hampshire disappearances, he wanted Governor Craig Benson to force the state police to bring the FBI in. The finest resource in the world is available, and you, sir, should direct Lieutenant John Scarinza and Troop F to accept its offer, Fred wrote, adding that there are corollary cases in Vermont also, and this entire
This one's floating
situation
high, but
begs
there's nothing
for
wrong with that.
coordination and investigation by an agency which is not bound by the confines and configuration of Grafton County and the Connecticut River. Lieutenant Scarinza, who
Tug,
was in charge of the
beholding.
state police effort, for his part, disagreed. Acknowledging that the FBI was involved in the case on the Massachusetts side, he argued that the state police had enough resources to conduct the investigation without federal assistance, something that had not, to that point, proven to be the case. At every turn, New Hampshire authorities had at best failed to execute on their responsibilities, and at worst had stood in the way of any further efforts by volunteers. Murray drew Benson's attention to these facts as well, arguing that state police and Haverhill police had been grossly negligent because a cruiser was not dispatched east along Route 112 to help find his daughter after her accident. Police had arrived just minutes after Maura was last seen by a witness, meaning that she couldn't have gotten particularly far and was likely just up the road when Sergeant Smith got to the scene. And Fred Murray was not without reason to believe this was the case. Along with the direction of the scent trail found by the dogs, he had received word the day of that April 29th press conference that someone had seen Maura heading eastbound along that same road. That witness was named Rick Forcier, and he'd contacted Mr. Murray when he realized that he might have seen Maura on the night of her disappearance. He had been driving home from a contracting job in Franconia that night, and he recalled seeing a young woman matching her description running along Route 112, about 4 or 5 miles east of the scene of her accident. Police, as it happened, had already interviewed Forcier on February 19th, but at that time, Forcier said nothing about this sighting, apparently because he thought it occurred 2 days after she disappeared. He told Fred Murray, however, that upon reviewing his records, he realized that he'd mixed up his dates during that first interview. If he had seen a young woman that night, it could have meant that Maura could have been recovered if someone had just bothered to drive east. She was figuratively and nearly literally right there, Murray's letter to the governor continued, readily available to be rescued and saved from whatever fate has befallen her. All that the police had to do was extend minimal mental and physical effort. The onus of this irresponsible and possibly fatal lack of action lies not only with the North Haverhill force, but also with the New Hampshire State Police, who responded to the 911 calls from neighbors as well. As of the time the Caledonian Record published that article, Governor Benson's office stated
She's still alive, still breathing, so I want to let her rest.
that they'd yet to receive the letter. But according to Murray, the Postal Service tracking system showed that it had been delivered the day before they made that statement. Whether it was incompetence or deliberate neglect, authorities were failing it every step of the way, and Murray was growing tired of it. Whether the governor's office received this letter or not, their answer came in some form through their silence, and through a joint announcement by the Vermont and New Hampshire State Police Bureaus on June 8, 2004. After a day-long meeting with the FBI Tuesday, the Caledonian Record reported, the state-level agencies told the press that there was no connection between the disappearances.
Of course not.
In a move that would infuriate both the Murray and the Maitland families, law enforcement then stated that Maitland had made several bad life choices before she disappeared, and at one point had been a runaway, while Murray had nearly cleaned out her bank account, packed up her belongings in her dorm room at UMass Amherst, and made off for destinations unknown. Both statements lacked the considerable nuance involved in both cases, and were clear attempts to blame the two missing women for whatever had happened to them.
Yeah, something's wrong
In
there.
reality, both cases involved total failures of procedure by the responding officers.
There we
Now,
go.
Brianna Maitland had made poor decisions in her life. There's no argument to be made about that. However, she wasn't making those decisions on the night she disappeared. She had just left work and was heading home to get some sleep before an early morning shift at her second job. Her car was discovered by police the following day, but rather than report the abandoned vehicle, which showed clear signs of distress on the part of the driver, and investigate the situation, the responding state trooper had the car towed and then went on a long weekend vacation without breathing a word of it to anyone else in the office. Mara's case wasn't quite so egregious, but the fact that the responding officer chose to drive back the way he came to look for her, rather than checking the route he hadn't already followed, made the Haverhill PD and the New Hampshire State Police look horribly unprofessional, considering that a state trooper had arrived on scene just moments after the police. Furthermore, in both cases, the vehicle was towed before the CSI team could arrive on site. Thanks to these failures, the investigations lost valuable time at crucially important moments, and destroyed the scene in the process.
There we go.
In response to the statements, Bruce Maitland pointed out that the authorities didn't have any evidence saying they aren't connected, and that the claims were almost character assassinations of the victims. He felt that the police were prematurely attempting to close both investigations by pitting the disappearances on runaway adults who didn't want to be found. And it's not hard to see why. Whatever the case, the Murray investigation changed direction soon after, when New Hampshire State Police showed up with a request for Mara's personal belongings. They had originally been returned to the family when the search was suspended in February, but as June rolled into July, something drove the police to seek a forensic examination of the items from Mara's car and dorm room. Along with what had been found in the car, they also confiscated her hard drive and the car itself, claiming that the state's major crimes division was stepping in to oversee the case from that point on.
Oh god, that's enough.
Police now taking over, but Lieutenant Scarinza made a point of telling the papers that major crimes weren't just stepping in for the first time. According to the Caledonian, he was emphatic that the items were not only now being looked at, and that major crimes had been involved in the Murray disappearance since 3 days after she disappeared. On the other hand, the paper reported that when asked whether any of the items, including clothing and books, had been analyzed for forensic evidence in the beginning of the investigation, he replied that you don't just send a bag of stuff down there. It seems he chose his language precisely because the items were certainly looked at when they were inventoried by the police. Examined by the forensics. What they didn't know, based on the very limited scope of their investigation, was that something was missing from the car. In addition to the missing bottles of Bailey's, Kahlua, and vodka, the transport backpack had also disappeared. left the scene of the accident without peril. If she did, they thought it might have something to do with the book Not Without Peril by Nicholas Howe, written about tragedies in the White Mountains, which was found in the back seat. And while explaining that they plan to hold all items for potential evidence later on, Strindberg said, for instance, is there something significant about the book? I don't know. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, but every time you put your information online, like when you're trying out for a free trial or you're requesting information from somewhere, that data is probably going and being sold to a data broker, and that is what our partner DeleteMe is here to help you with. And while a data broker having your information isn't the greatest thing, because you're definitely going to receive a lot of scam calls, texts, emails, even sometimes targeted advertisements that are going to make you question if you're being listened to, you are. The bigger problem is the threat of being harassed, doxxed, attacked due to publicly expressed opinions or political views, or your occupation, anything like that. If you've been looking around the world recently, then you've probably noticed it's not a very good place to be. We're very much in a situation where you say, I like waffles, and people say, so you hate pancakes at the moment. That can get dangerous. And on top of the ever-present threat of people who don't understand nuance, there's also the risk of identity theft and becoming the target of phishing scams. Identity theft is actually harder to avoid than you might think, and as I found out personally, your bank may not think anything of you paying for something at CVS in State College, Pennsylvania, and then somebody taking $1,000 out of your checking account with a debit card that's in your wallet somehow, 3 hours away from a payday. Now, phishing, of course, you should be able to avoid, but just in case you can't, or more importantly, in case your grandmother can't, DeleteMe will help with that. And then, of course, on top
I think one of our
targeted harassment and the identity theft and the Nigerian princes, there is always the possibility of stalking. Now, are you going to be stalked by a Nigerian prince? Probably not, but you might be stalked by Creepy Jerry. Who's Creepy Jerry? I don't know. He's on the internet and therefore anonymous, and that's why DeleteMe is here to help. Now, you might be asking, well, how does DeleteMe help with Creepy Jerry or the Nigerian prince or somebody from the internet who thought that I am racist against pancakes? Well, the answer is that you give them your information and you say, hey, I don't want this information on the internet. And then they run an algorithm that trawls all of the data brokerage sites for that information, all the listing sites and whatnot, and then they file takedown requests. And you might be thinking, well, why can't I file the takedown request on my own? You can, but you have to manually do that hundreds upon hundreds of websites. And then if that information comes up for sale again, they'll just slap it right back on you. So basically, you have to just keep on requesting this constantly over and over and over and over again, and that becomes rather stressful and time-consuming, so why not just pay DeleteMe a little bit of money to do it for you? Now, I will tell you, as somebody who is something of a public figure and therefore deals with threats of stalking, harassment, and of course the pancake people, I do worry, and that's why I use DeleteMe, to make sure that I am as unfindable as possible, and that, I don't have to resort to more violent methods of self-defense. So, if you would like to make it harder for the Nigerian prince, the pancake person, or your local Creepy Jerry to find you, you can get 20% off DeleteMe consumer plans when you go to joindeleteme.com/lorelodge.
I'm so high right now off paint glue.
Once again, that is joindeleteme.com/lorelodge, code lorelodge at checkout.
What day is it?
I don't know. Seems like it could be the slogan for the Maura Murray investigation. But there are reasons to believe that the investigators knew more than they were letting on. Not least among them was the refusal to accept potential evidence even when it was literally being handed to them. On one occasion in late 2004, Fred Murray went to state police headquarters with a stained rusty jackknife, which he received from a man who believed his own brother might be connected to the disappearance. However, when Fred tried to hand it over, he reportedly did not get beyond the plate glass window. According to the Whitney-Hanson Express, Fred recalled telling the dispatcher, I have what could be evidence in a capital crime, only to be told that no one was available at headquarters to accept such evidence. Instead, he was told to come back during regular work hours, though he opted to mail the evidence instead, along with a full explanation of how he'd come to possess it. Given that Fred Murray did not live in central New Hampshire, this is a reasonable thing to do. And the police indeed confirmed receipt of the package, but they never reached out about it. If that weren't enough, late 2004 also saw yet another revelation about the total incompetence of the investigation. Unwilling to give up just because the police had, the
There we go.
Roshes
It's starting to look like something, isn't it?
and that led them to reach out
I
to
want like a
Dominic
jute
South
twine.
Melody in Bartlett, New Hampshire.
I don't know if I have any
Mara had
though.
called them on the day she
I
disappeared.
probably do, I just don't know where in the mess.
Renting their condo, and the families hoped the couple might have
We could
some
probably get away
idea
with the
what
yard,
Mark's
actually.
plans were on that fateful day. But when Sharon Rosh called them in October, she was shocked to learn that she was the first person to reach out to them about the disappearance. Despite being some of the last people to speak to Mara on the day she went
I
missing,
have this, but
police
it's awful
had never
fine.
bothered to interview. It blew our minds, Sharon told the Patriot Ledger, that it's now 8 months later and we're finding out the police never even called these people. As the revelations of investigative inadequacy mounted, the Murrays reached a breaking point in their relationship with law enforcement, and they abandoned any hope that the authorities would do the right thing. But Fred made one final appeal to the new governor, John Lynch, on the first anniversary of his daughter's disappearance. On
Yeah, it's too
February
fine.
9th, 2005,
Cute,
he
but too
headed to
fine.
Concord, New Hampshire, in the hope of meeting with the new executive. He was only able to speak with the governor for about 10 minutes, but Fred had planned for that sort of outcome. As a backup, he'd written a letter explaining what had happened and why he needed assistance, and unlike last time, he made sure to hand it directly to the man who most needed to read it. In that letter, Fred Murray excoriated the astonishingly careless, go-through-the-motions response of the New Hampshire State Police, as well as their unnaturally steadfast refusal to communicate on the matter since. He outlined their failures in detail, including not
What's the
questioning
hearing?
neighbors
Oh,
who
right,
lived
it's over
100 yards from and in sight of the accident scene until 10 days had passed, and the fact that they only did so because the Murrays demanded it after calling those people themselves. Not even the fact that their tracking dog lost Mara's scent squarely before these properties, one of which was owned by the last person who talked to Mara, and another by the last person to actually see her, he wrote in a fury, was enough to provoke the most elementary of basic investigatory techniques. Fred pulled no punches regarding his beliefs about the reality of the situation, writing that law enforcement's decision on this case from its inception has been to insist that you can take your pick of 3 possible happenstances. Self-delete for the purpose of YouTube, runaway or hypothermia victim, but not consider the 4th, which is the probability rather than the possibility, that is, that a bad guy grabbed her and they can't catch him. Beyond basic incompetence, Fred Murray even accused the state police of deliberately misleading the public, explaining how, in order to support their diversion, the commander of Group F twice stated during a television appearance in Boston that Mara wrote a final letter to her boyfriend and left it in a prominent place in her dormitory room. As far as Fred was concerned, this was an attempt to suggest the traditional goodbye letter, when in reality she never wrote or left such a letter at all. Something he said police were fully cognizant of at the time. The pattern certainly doesn't indicate adherence to accepted and recommended police procedure, continued, adding that, to date, the high law enforcement officials in Concord have reacted like ostriches to this pseudo-investigation. Finally, as a last blow to the investigators, he pointed out that their incompetence was only made worse by the fact that, even with it being so obvious that they lacked the ability to solve the case on their own, they remained determined to not accept the offer of meaningful participation extended by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Finished the letter with a plea to Governor Lynch, writing, "You represent my final hope to help my little girl. I pray you will regard reacting favorably to my entreaty not so much as a political obligation, but as a parent, your moral responsibility." If Governor Lynch ever read the letter, then it seems he was unmoved. Though he told Fred Murray that he would look into the situation, the desperate father met with the same resistance as always when he met with New Hampshire authorities a month later. There would be no release of files, no reclassification of the case, and no acceptance of FBI assistance. Fred Murray held out hope
He has
for
an
a
inside
year,
job.
but when nothing changed, he had only one option left if he hoped to force some kind of movement. On December 29, 2005, he sued the should be turned over to him so he could continue searching for information in the hopes of finding Mara. As far as he was concerned, the fact that Mara could be in danger was a compelling reason for requiring the respondents to disclose the records. The Grafton County Superior Court, located in North Haverhill, Haverhill, I had like 8 different ways of pronouncing this, given to me in the comments. We have places nearby that are Haverford and Havertown. That's why I've been saying Haverhill, but I guess it's Haverhill or Haverhill. I'll go with Haverhill, try and make everybody happy. Anyway, the Grafton County Superior Court, located in North Haverhill, wasted no time in responding to this lawsuit. And on January 26, 2006, they issued their decision. They acknowledged that Murray's argument was based upon two suppositions: that law enforcement authorities have characterized Mara's case as a missing persons matter and not a criminal investigation, and that the investigation does not appear to be ongoing. Despite both of these suppositions being accurate to the facts, his request was categorically denied under the reasoning that the records sought by the petitioner are investigatory in nature and have been compiled for law enforcement purposes, and therefore should be exempt from disclosure because production of the records would clearly interfere with enforcement proceedings. All of this was based upon the court's claim that this was an ongoing criminal investigation in which no arrests have been made, once again despite the fact that law enforcement repeatedly refused to reclassify the case as a criminal investigation and that they were not actively investigating any leads, new or old. To add insult to injury, they argued that they came to this conclusion due to Murray's insistence that foul play had not been ruled out, rather than any official classification of the case as criminal in nature. Murray's lawyer, Timothy Irvin, found all of that preposterous, and in particular the claims about classification. They can't just, with a broad stroke, say everything's exempt, Irvin told the press. This is a missing person case. It's not a criminal investigation. In essence, they couldn't just claim it was a missing persons case to get out of investigating, and then turn around and claim it was a criminal investigation to avoid disclosure. He further explained that somewhere in the stacks of 2,500 pages of records may be a phone number, an email address, or a name that stuck out to Mara's father in ways that would not catch the attention of the police, and that all they wanted was to add to what the police have done and see if we can find something new. Irvin then appealed the case to the New Hampshire Supreme Court, who proceeded to hand down a demand for a re-examination of the issue a few months later, and this led to an evidentiary hearing back in Grafton in April. Unfortunately, Judge Vaughn once again sided with the police, stating that even partial disclosure could reasonably be expected to interfere with law enforcement proceedings. As for what proceedings he was talking about, it was a little bit difficult to say. Despite the fact that there were no suspects in the case, New Hampshire Assistant Attorney General Jeff Strelson testified that there was a 75% likelihood of prosecution, and therefore the release of records could jeopardize their non-existent case. Fred Murray, rightfully in my opinion, felt that this was a complete charade and that the reality was simple. They didn't do what they were supposed to do, and they've been covering up ever since.
EQ Bank, it's here to help you make bank.
The new Huggies 360 diaper pants keep my baby protected from leaks no matter how he moves.
Add sparkle to any design with glitter stickers by Sticker Mule. Glitter stickers are a fun way to showcase your artwork, promote your brand, or bedazzle the ordinary. Each sticker is printed in full color on a glitter-like material that will make your artwork truly shine. To get started, select a size and quantity, upload your artwork, and check out. Within a few hours, we'll send you a proof showing how your glitter stickers will look. You can request changes to the proof for free until you're happy. With easy ordering, fast turnaround, and free shipping, Sticker Mule is the internet's favorite place to buy glitter stickers.
I don't know if it's too junky or what. I don't think it's enough. Here's the glue. Right here. Let's try this.
If the police were looking for a way to prove that Fred was right, it came in October of that same year, when Fred received a tip about a home on Valley Road, about a mile from the scene of the accident. After obtaining permission to search the property from the real estate agent overseeing its sale, he brought in a volunteer canine team from the New Hampshire League of Investigators. According to the Express, their cadaver dog hid on the second floor, and when they brought in another set of 4 cadaver dogs the next day, they went bonkers outside of a closet on the first floor. The private volunteer search team bagged a number of items indicated by the dogs and even took a sample of the carpet, and then they turned everything over to the state police.
I wouldn't do that.
According to private investigator John Healy, police were not at all interested in the evidence and would not take the carpet into their possession. Now, if you look at the Wikipedia page for this case, there is an interesting conundrum. Their version of the story has an update regarding this house, which says that in April of 2019, an excavation was done in that house after ground-penetrating radar revealed something buried under the basement. However, the articles it cites for this don't seem to be about the same house referenced in the Whitman-Hanson Express and other contemporary coverage. Instead, it would seem that they're describing a second home, about which Fred received a tip early on in the case. According to a CBS News report, Fred had tried on multiple occasions to get access to this house in the years between Maura's disappearance and the article's publication in February of 2019, but the homeowners had denied him access every time. It was only after the property changed hands in 2018 that Fred was able to go in and do some digging. Considering that none of the more recent articles describing this house mention the 2006 search, that the 2018 house was described as astonishingly close to the crash site as compared to about a mile away, and that the later articles make no mention of hits upstairs, it seems possible that these are two different properties rather than two separate investigations of the Valley Road house. Either way, the tip Fred Murray received was very specific. A body had been buried in the basement shortly after Maura disappeared. In 2018, after receiving permission to do a sweep, two separate cadaver dogs hit on a spot in the basement, and ground-penetrating radar confirmed there was some sort of disturbance underneath the concrete flooring. Even for the ever-incompetent New Hampshire State Police, that kind of evidence was too much to ignore. So, in March 2019, they set out their own team of two cadaver dogs to search the basement. Jeff Streltson told Boston.com that the state police felt there was certainly no probable cause to do so, and that it was really done to just cross something off the list, which aren't statements that inspire confidence in their efforts when you really think about it. It's not totally clear what the police search involved, but CBS reported in April 2019 that they received permission from the new homeowners to dig up a small area of concrete in the basement, and that Streltson said the private searcher's ground-penetrating radar had detected disturbed ground, not a body. Boston.com added that officials found absolutely nothing other than what appears to be a piece of pottery or old piping. With that, the lead was dismissed, at least by the police. Fred Murray, on the other hand, wasn't so sure he agreed with their assessment. It was his opinion that the police had dug in the wrong place, and that he wasn't satisfied they got anywhere close enough to the corner where the private dogs indicated something was buried. This one hurts because I thought we finally had it, he told CBS. This one was worse than the other false alarms or dead ends. I was pretty sure based on what I heard and who the people were and other things I've heard about them. And that particular statement caught my attention, as did something written in Boston.com article. Fred Murray said he believes his daughter is dead, and that the man who lived in the house at the time of the crash and his nearby extended family members were responsible. I believe I tracked down the exact home in question, but unfortunately I've hit a dead end in identifying who owned it prior to 2018. Even if I were able to confirm that information, however, I wouldn't be able to share it for privacy reasons. Not because it would be illegal, but because it just probably wouldn't be the most appropriate thing. I just want to say that if I do turn out to be right about it, it will not be the first time that this has happened. But anyway, unless police agree to perform a full excavation and to finally treat this as a criminal investigation, nobody will be able to say for certain that the house holds no secrets. It has now been nearly 20 years since Jeff Streltson said there was a 75% chance of prosecution in the Maura Murray investigation, and in that time, not one suspect has been publicized. Not one piece of evidence has been uncovered. Not one
That's because
example
it's the
of
cops.
police work has emerged.
It's an inside
All
job.
that has been done has been achieved by volunteers and through the sheer force of will coming from Fred Murray, who to this day maintains a belief that his daughter met with foul play.
Of course she
She's not
did.
alone in that belief either, even as the
We all know
New
she
Hampshire
did.
authorities and others, like author James Renner, argued for various reasons that she chose to leave of her own accord. On the other hand, there are many who agree with Fred that someone local to the crash site abducted Maura, while others have come forward with theories that she was either lured there or chosen as a target of opportunity by someone traveling through the region. And in that case, the big question is, Brady Maitland case PI, Greg Overacker, thinks he may know the answer. And it's one that does fit with Renner's hypothesis, at least to some extent. In our video on Brianna's case, we briefly went over Greg's theory that a serial killer may have been responsible for both the disappearances of Maura and Brianna in 2004. And while he says the name of this alleged murderer, he's heavily implying that it is the same man who was convicted for the death of Michelle Gardner Quinn in October of 2006. Like Brianna, she lived in northern Vermont, where she attended UVM. And like Maura, Michelle was a 21-year-old college student who was last seen on October 7th when she went out for dinner with her parents before meeting up with friends for some drinks. After leaving the bar to head back to her residence, Overacker writes that she borrowed a phone from a stranger on the street to call a friend, someone she had gotten separated from. This man was Brian Rooney, who later answered Michelle's phone when that friend, Tommy Lang, called her back. Tommy later told reporters that Rooney said something to the effect of, "I guess you want to speak with this beautiful brunette standing next to me." As you can imagine, it did not take long for authorities to charge Brian Rooney for the murder of Michelle Gardner Quinn. Security camera footage from a jewelry store caught Brian and Michelle walking together around 2:30 that morning, and when Michelle's body was recovered from a crevice in Huntington Gorge on October 13th, he became the prime suspect. Forensic evidence, and in particular DNA analysis, linked him to the assault almost immediately, and by October 25th, he was set to stand trial. He was already in custody for another unrelated sexual offense after being arrested the same day teenage hikers found Michelle's remains, and in March of 2008, a jury convicted him of first-degree murder. His lawyer put up a valiant defense, arguing that the state's case lacked witnesses to the abduction and killing, and hinged on 2 nanograms of sperm handled by a forensic lab with a history of sloppy work. But the jury wasn't having it. The judge wasn't either, and openly referred to a teary-eyed Rooney as the lowest of the low during sentencing. He later appealed, his new lawyer arguing that there was no proof that the victim had died on the night she was assaulted, and therefore the DNA evidence could not be used to prove that Rooney was responsible for her murder. But the Vermont Supreme Court stood by the decision of the lower court. Brian Rooney is currently serving life without parole, and given his history of abuse towards not only adult women, but also young girls, that's exactly what he deserves, if not more. David, for entirely unrelated purposes that, for legal reasons, have nothing to do with Brian Rooney, can you please place an image of a wood chipper on screen and make the sound something of a wood chipper? Unrelated, of course. All of that business aside, the question is, could he be responsible for the disappearances of Mara and Brianna? There are certainly a good number of commonalities between the victims, something that profilers refer to as victimology. All 3 were attractive, young, white women with dark hair. All 3 were in some form of distress when they were last seen. Mara and Brianna had just been in car accidents, and Gardner Quinn had become separated from her friends late at night. One of the most difficult parts about connecting the cases would be geography, but Rooney worked construction and traveled frequently. He once committed an assault in St. Johnsbury, Vermont, which is generally in the middle of the Murray, Maitland, and Quinn disappearances, and at the time of his arrest and in 2006, the New York Times reported that he was living in Richmond, Vermont, not far from the Huntington Gorge. And while I've been unable to confirm it, a Reddit post also links him to the Mountain Lakes neighborhood of Woodsville, New Hampshire in 2004, which is precisely the area where Mara disappeared. Leaving aside the unconfirmed information from Reddit, Brian's familiarity with northern Vermont and the itinerant nature of his job means that the geography actually does make a lot of sense. The bigger question is how he would have met Brianna and Mara, considering they both disappeared in very rural areas compared to Michelle. Overacker has a theory for that one too, and it's not a bad one. Brianna, he suggested, may have met Rooney at one of her 2 jobs, either in Montgomery or St. Albans, Vermont. Of the 2, the St. Albans one is the more likely, mainly because she was a server there while she worked in the back as a dishwasher at the other. And while I typically don't trust books at face value, at least not without other evidence that corroborates what's in them, Overacker actually has a very good reputation as a PI and had explicit permission and even encouragement from the family when writing his book, unlike James Renner, who we'll be getting to in a moment. And I bring this up because one thing he says at the end of his work is that in the days prior to Brianna's disappearance, she had told a close friend that she'd met an older man at work. The friend seemed to believe that she was talking about the Black Lantern Inn, where she was washing dishes, but Overacker wonders if she might have been mistaken about which job Brianna was talking about. If that man were Rooney, it could be possible that she had told him about her job with Black Lantern, and that on the night she disappeared, he was lying in wait for her. Brianna was on a predictable path home from work and had a reasonably rigid schedule if someone were looking to ambush or otherwise intercept her. Personally, I don't think that necessarily explains several of the other circumstances surrounding Brianna's disappearance, but I can't say that it's impossible. And I would like to have Overacker on the live show to talk through it, but I've yet to hear back from him about the appearance. When it comes to Mara, however, I'm not so sure that I like this explanation at all. The major flaw with Overacker's hypothesis, in my opinion, is with regard to why Mara was there in the first place. She wasn't walking along a road in her college town, and she wasn't driving a predictable route on her way home from work. She was in the middle of nowhere, in a place that wasn't part of the printed out routes found in her car, or in the searches she made the night before. And so far as investigators and the FBI could tell, she hadn't contacted anyone to say where she was going. Unlike Brianna and Michelle, she wasn't living in Vermont or New Hampshire, and so far as I can tell, none of Rooney's known victims were in the Grand State. The only way I can imagine Rooney could have come across Mara is if he was in fact living in Mountain Lakes at the time, and I don't see evidence that he was. So what does that mean? If Mara wasn't a victim of Brian Rooney, then why was she in New Hampshire, and how did she disappear? As we've already established, the New Hampshire State Police will tell you that she intended to go missing, either to get away from her life or to end it on her own terms. But they've never been able to explain why she might have done either of those things. This is where James Renner comes in. A self-proclaimed gonzo journalist, Renner is the author of the 2016 book True Crime Addict: How I Lost Myself in the Mysterious Disappearance of Mara Murray. It's a book that Renner actively acknowledges he was explicitly asked not to write, and one that is written in a very self-centered, oddly autobiographical way. That said, it is filled with interviews that allegedly involve people Mara knew in various aspects of her life, and form the basis of Renner's arguments. Now, he wrote an entire book, so I'll have to do a fair bit of summarizing here, and I think the best way to do that is by starting with his conclusion and then working backwards through his reasoning. Simply, though, Renner thinks Mara had several reasons to leave her life behind, and that her disappearance was a carefully orchestrated attempt to get away before anyone even knew she was missing. In the 60th chapter of a book that really didn't need more than 25 of them, James Renner tells the story of a 2013 trip he made to Quebec, Canada, as he and some associates followed up on several tips suggesting Mara had been seen there. One came from an April 8, 2009 post on the website Topics, where a user on the Amherst page posted a message reading, "I saw Mara Murray alive and well in Sherbrooke, Quebec. I approached her and said, 'Hi, Mara.' She turned toward me and said, 'Hi,' then gasped and looked like she was going to pass out from shock. I have no doubt this is Mara Murray. She is apparently alive and well and living in Canada. When I saw her, she was with a very handsome young man. In a shocking coincidence, another user posting in the section of the Canadian village of Saint-Étienne de Barboina, or I don't care, it's French. Spell it right and I'll pronounce it right. Spell things how you want them to be pronounced. This goes for you too, Massachusetts. And New Hampshire, really all of you. Be better. Anyway, someone in the Canadian village of Saint-Roch-Nebu posted about Mara on the exact same day. That comment reading, "Mara Murray was seen in Quebec City, Quebec Province. She is alive and well. Very well. Her new squeeze is a hunk." Before going any further, I think it's important to point out a couple things about those statements. First, the phrase alive and well is used in both, and then both mention that she was with an attractive man, one of them rather more enthusiastically than the other. The shared phrasing and the repetition of the romantic themes stand out to me, and would suggest that both posts were either made by the same person, or that one was based upon the other. The first, according to Renner, was posted from a computer in Brockton, Massachusetts, while the second came from one in Houston, Texas. But that could mean someone in Brockton was using a VPN to mask their identity as being in Houston. Alternatively, Topics may have allowed users to self-designate their location, making it even easier for someone with two different accounts to post from two different places. All of this is to say that I'm a little bit skeptical about the authenticity of the site. I would have gone back and checked for myself, but Topics is now defunct. Of course, these aren't the only posts pointing to Mara being in Quebec, as Renner notes both in his book and on his blog. Perhaps the most famous and the most detailed was a message posted to a GeoCities page in 2009, which also alleged Mara was living in Canada at that time. The post is relatively short, so I'll go through it in full before we dive into the claims that it made. Mara Murray is not a missing person, it read. Mara Murray has the right, as every independent adult does, to leave with her new boyfriend and start a new life. Mara is living a content and satisfying life in the province of Quebec. According to the post, Mara's home life wasn't as positive as reporting had suggested. The author claimed that Fred Murray never quite forgave her for being asked to leave West Point, and that her being effectively kicked out bruised his ego beyond repair. It was his criticism, the post alleged, that led to Mara's decision to run away in favor of a new life.
So she was definitely kidnapped by this guy.
Additionally, the author claimed that Mara's relationship with William Roche was near its end, and that, according to Mara's sister Kathleen, they were having serious problems. Mara had also allegedly met someone new, who, unlike William Roche, had no West Point connections, and therefore was not a constant reminder to her of her failure at West Point. There's already a lot to unpack here, but that's not even the real bombshell of the post, which goes on to say that on the night of February 5th, 2004, Mara took a break from her job at the security desk at a UMass dormitory to go and briefly get coffee and some food. And at sometime between 12 midnight and 1 a.m., Mara, driving her Saturn, struck and critically injured the UMass student Petri Bassi, leaving him for dead. Now, this was not the first time that someone suggested a connection between Mara's disappearance and the hit and run of this student. The Whitman-Hanson Express published an article about it in June of 2007, but we'll come back to that in a second. The Post continues, reading around 1 a.m. to 1:20 a.m., February 6th.
I'm busy.
A complete emotional breakdown brought on by this hit-and-run accident, which was witnessed by a student who reported this to Mara's supervisor, who then came and saw that Mara needed physical help to get back to her dormitory. From there, we have a time jump to the morning of February 8th, when Mara was involved in the accident in her father's car. The author claims that the car was towed to his motel room in Hadley, and then goes on to make some rather severe allegations about what happened that night. Fred was not happy with Mara, to put it mildly, the Post reads, adding that, what happened in this motel room we'll never know, but I do know for a fact that there was some physical violence on the part of Fred Murray. Fred Murray has a history of domestic violence. The next day, he left for good. Again, we will come back to that, because this doesn't get any less convoluted as it goes on. According to the author, Mara's crash in New Hampshire was deliberate.
When are we gonna call that done for the night? Thanks for stopping in. Shut up, I don't care. Let them all die. I think they're good to go for now. I can finish gluing them down tomorrow. Everything is sticky. Alright, thank you guys for stopping by. If you did, sorry about the shit live stream today. Yeah, we'll try it again tomorrow.